I'm Allison Eyring, CEO of Organization Solutions and adjunct professor in the NUS Business School. It's my pleasure to be here today with Chong Meng, who's the CEO of PSA International. Welcome, Chong Meng.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about PSA International.
PSA International is 15 years old. In fact, we celebrated our anniversary, 15 years anniversary, just last year. It was born out of Port of Singapore Authority that have operations in Singapore for 40 years. And 15 years ago, the role of the authority was separated from the commercial role of the container port. And that's when PSA International was formed. It was also the point in time where PSA decided to go offshore. So for the last 15 years, we've been growing our footprint globally. It operates now in about 17 countries, with a flagship operation in Singapore and another one in Europe. PSA now stands for about 10% volume share of all container handling in the world.
Chong Meng, in your career, you've spent many years in a Western multinational and now here at the helm of PSA International. How would you describe how Asian multinationals choose to grow?
The way I look at Asian versus Western companies and how they confront growth is that it is not so much influenced by the origin of the business. In fact, I think the industries that they are in, or companies are in, influences to a great extent their growth paradigm. For instance, a consumer company. A consumer company grows value on the basis of brands, product innovation and adaptation, and marketing. For that, inevitably, it needs to have local understanding. On the other hand, you have the skills and services companies, which are less capital intensive, and growth is dependent on their ability to apply intellectual property and operational skills. For that, they need to be in the local countries themselves. And then you have asset and infrastructure companies, which are very capital intensive, where the access to markets, license to operate, and capital allocation are very important. And you have to have then strategic decision-making capability, but a good understanding of the markets you want to operate in, and an ability to influence the rules within those markets. These are some of the things that are very important in determining how companies in different industries actually choose their growth paradigm and approach, as opposed to just being whether they are Eastern or Western.
So it sounds like your perspective is that there's a more significant difference by what business you're in rather than whether you're an Asian business or a Western business.
I think there are three things to consider when companies look at growing beyond their comfortable frontiers. Number one, values. Do they have a consistent set of values from which to approach growth opportunities? Western multinationals tend to have the advantage of decades, if not a century, of development. Asian companies do not tend to have that history. And there is still quite a number of Asian companies that are very driven by the values of the founding person. The second area to consider is core competencies. I think Western companies have had the time and the test period to codify their operations. Now, Asian companies, in contrast, have not traveled that distance. And then a third area to consider, people and organization. Here, I think there are two elements that differentiate Western companies from Asian: diversity and empowerment. Yes, there can be good values, there can even be good processes. But are Asian companies willing, able to embrace the diversity and to develop diverse talents from its global footprint in order to become its next leaders?
What would be an example of a value held within PSA International that you feel is particularly Singaporean?
I can cite a couple of values that are very key in PSA and very linked to Singapore, the nation. One is spirit of partnership and long-term thinking. We believe in working together with people over the long term and create mutual value. That's one. And the other is delivering excellent results reliably.
Chong Meng, do you think that the long-term horizon is going to change as Asian multinationals become more global, as they become more publicly owned?
I think over time, the world will become more globalized. There will be different expectations of consumers around the world, but depending on the business that you are in, whether it's consumer, scale, or infrastructure based, competitiveness will depend on scale, consistency of performance, and also innovation. And to that extent, I think the world will continue to consolidate around the champions of the various industries. In our industry, there's probably half a dozen so-called champions, and I believe PSA is one of them. All these future champions, today's big players, are all global in nature.
You talked about innovation. Do you see a difference between how Asian multinationals innovate and how their Western counterparts innovate?
I think at this point in time, Alison, Western companies would tend to value intangibles more readily than Asian counterparts. I think Western companies have a longer track record of seeing the life cycle of product innovations, to be confident that putting money in these areas, which may be intangible in the current year, is actually a worthwhile thing to do. But I also believe that Asian companies will catch up. Again, let's not stereotype. Japan has been a great innovator. Korea, great innovations. Taiwan. So even as I'm saying this, I think there are already people who are setting the pace for Asian companies. However, by and large, when you look at ASEAN companies and perhaps west of that, you find that the companies themselves are also still at a scale where they cannot afford too many big bets in innovation expense. And as a result, they have to be more cautious and more frugal.
Now, you said that Asian multinationals are more cautious about investing money in intellectual property or knowledge assets. Do you see innovation more often in product innovation or innovation around operations, for instance?
Oh, I see both product as well as service and operations innovations. And in fact, if you look at China, I mean, the number of patents that are filed from China is just mind-boggling and incredible. They have the market base, they have the consumer base. Asia, with its population, will become a huge consumption base, whether it's for service innovation or product innovation. And where there's reward, there will be the creativity.
If you compare an Asian multinational and a Western multinational that have grown outside of their home market, would you see as much organization complexity in terms of matrix structures or dual reporting in an Asian multinational as you would in a Western multinational?
As you go global, you will need to have consistency of standards, performance, and the way you treat and develop people. So inevitably, this cannot be done through corridors of influence. This has to be done through clear and proper, transparent processes, which are understood by all corners of the organization. And inevitably, then, matrices will have to be used and strengthened.
Let's recap 3 takeaways from our interview with PSA International CEO Chong Meng. First, when exploring opportunities for growth, companies must maintain consistency with their core values. Second, as the world becomes more globalized, growth leaders must find ways to drive consistency of standards and performance, as well as to innovate. This becomes increasingly important and challenging as the firm grows. Third, Asia's rapidly growing consumer base will offer big rewards for companies who can innovate in product and services better and faster than their competition. In part 2 of our interview, I'll be asking Chong Meng about the lessons he's learned as a growth leader.